Welcome, everyone, to the MMA Happy Hour podcast. I am Kyle Anthony, your host for today. We are talking UFC Noche, headlined by Gene Silva and Diego Lopez. We're going to be breaking down 4 plays here on the show today. Now, listen, we are coming off a losing night last weekend at UFC Paris. Very disappointed about it. Went 4-2 on our client plays, missed on our big play, which was Caio Borralho. Thought he was going to go out there, control the action, dominate out there. I thought Imavov would slow down. Caio looked really flat out there. I thought he looked really bad overall out there. Really wasn't able to get really much going. And credit to Imavov for getting the job done. We did lose 2 units last week, so not too happy about it, but we have to keep moving forward here. And we have in front of us Noche UFC, and we've got some plays locked in for clients. If you want to be a client, link down in the description. And also, before we get into the show, I will hopefully be announcing next week the new sponsor to the show. I'm really excited about it. We've been kind of in conversations over the last couple of weeks. I actually thought that I was gonna be able to announce it on this show this week. We were going through the contract stuff and everything, so it looks like it's gonna take probably next week I'll be able to announce it. So be on the lookout for that. But with that being said, let's dive into the main event of the evening between Gene Silva and Diego Lopez. Now, we've got Silva sitting at minus 220. Line has been moving around a little bit. On the other side, we've got Diego Lopez at plus 180. Now, you look at Lopez here, he is the dog, but man, he is dangerous. And the one thing that he's able to do is he's pretty damn well-rounded, on the feet. He's going to have some great striking, good boxing overall, good hand speed, especially early. He's been able to go out there, knock guys out early, drop guys, and just has looked really good on the feet and definitely getting better and better, I think, as you're seeing him continually improve on the feet. And then also, we obviously do know that he is an elite level grappler. This fight hits the mat, Silva could be in trouble. We know he is, top notch on the ground and does have that submission ability and get the ability to get that finish. With that being said, there are some red flags here that I do think are on the Lopez side. And I think the biggest one being here and the most obvious one here is his inability to wrestle. And I know that's easy to say here where you talk about certain guys, and we're talking about one a little bit also who may struggle with takedowns, but an elite level grappler. And that to me is just, it's such a disconnect to his path to victory. It really is to me. And I think that, he's able to, do certain things to certain level fighters, and he has fought some tough guys. There's no doubt, I don't want to take any credit away from him, but you are seeing that he kind of really needs to lean on the boxing now and the rest, not the wrestling and on the boxing, because he just doesn't have the ability to get those takedowns. And you are seeing him again. You are seeing him elevate the striking. It is getting better. We are seeing that there is absolutely no doubt. But the takedowns just aren't coming, and nor is he really trying too much to get these takedowns here. Out of his 8 UFC fights, including Dana White's Contender Series, he's only secured 2 takedowns. Over those 8 fights, he secured 2 takedowns. That to me is really a red flag here for a guy that is just so elite on the ground. Against Volkanovski, he didn't even shoot a takedown against Volkanovski there. And the spot there is that he just outpaced him. He went out there, he was able to outpace him, 158 significant strikes to 63, favoring obviously Volkanovski there. And that's something where I do think that Silva can kind of implement that game plan. I think he can be able to, sprawl and brawl, defend these takedowns, outpace him, push out a pace a little bit. Now, the pace sometimes can be a little bit lower for Silva, but I do think that the blueprint kind of is there for him. You got, Silva, who will have multiple advantage here as well. And I do think you kind of look at it here, the power, I think, does go to Silva here. Yes, again, we do know that Lopez is going to have some opportunities early. But the one thing about that is that, I do think that he can slow down. We're going to talk about that in a second, but I do think he can slow down. Also, I do like the fact that Silva does have that physicality and strength advantage. So if Lopez is looking for these takedowns, is looking to kind of get some kind of control, I do think that the strength, physicality, and his ability to be explosive is going to get him out of those spots, create the space, get back to striking, get back to landing shots overall. And you did see even for Silva, you did see recently where he was able to go out there. And, one thing that you did see against Bryce Mitchell is that, Bryce couldn't get him down. Bryce got solid wrestling overall, and Bryce went 1 for 14 on takedown attempts in a fight that was ended early. I thought that was pretty damn impressive overall, and I do think that if that's something he can do here, where he can kind of make these guys pay. Every time that Bryce Mitchell closed that distance, Silva was throwing heavy, heavy shots. And then these shots became, from Bryce became, very, very lackluster, very, very just sloppy because he knew the big shots were coming, started to slow him down. And I think that's something that he can do to Lopez if this fight does play out that way. And Lopez, some of the other issues with him is that he's very hittable, and that's something that you have consistently seen him on the center line, leaving his head there, even in big striking exchanges. Now, he does have quick hands early. There's no doubt. Again, I want to make sure that people understand. I do believe that. But also, he does, as the fight goes on, he slows down. The cardio concerns are there. You definitely see as he's going through a fight, not only just the fact that the technical stuff really just goes away, but it just gets wild. You do see Lopez, he's just getting wild in the pocket. You're seeing the sloppy combinations. I think that his durability might be a little bit of a concern there as well, too, leaving his head on the center line. And if those things are starting to happen and he's going to start to move forward with Silva on the feet, I think Silva finds this kill shot here. I think he lands a big shot here. Maybe not right away, but I do think throughout this fight here in this 5-rounder, I do think that Silva can put Lopez away. And you've got Silva here sitting around that minus 220 number here. I do like Silva by knockout, which is sitting around plus 100 here. I like that number, and I do believe that's how Silva gets a job done. So I'm going Gene Silva by knockout plus 100. And the next one here we're going to talk about is going to be Alexander Hernandez. He is minus 113 on the comeback here for Diego Ferreira. We have a pick'em minus 113. Now, Hernandez is a guy that, coming into the UFC, the guy had some hype, right? He was, we all can laugh at it because it was a situation where he fought Donald Cerrone. It really just seemed like this was going to be his big coming out party. There was some hype around him. He was young, explosive, had the look, was talking the talk. And then things just really started to fall apart, just completely unraveled. It looked like he lost his confidence. It didn't look like he was really going out there and, making good decisions. His fight IQ looked bad. I just really thought not I thought, but you could see that he was not really just putting it together. Now he's on a nice 3-0 run. And I do think he is starting to put this together. You did see him most recently, goes out there, knocks out Chase Hooper in that first round. Impressive. Yes, it's Chase Hooper has really, starting to get better striking, but, on the feet, he's definitely gonna be a little bit more clumsy. But we also got to remember that Hernandez is only 29 years old, 32 years old. You got to remember that, and now he's starting to hit his stride. He's starting to really enter his prime. I think he's starting to really put everything together here. While you've got Diego Ferreira on their side here, who's now 40 years old. And yes, he has had, mixed success and definitely, a little bit of a resurgence here over the last 3 fights where he's been able to find some victories, get some knockouts, has looked pretty good. But the one thing about this is the fact that, he's 40 years old, but you add in the fact that he is also at 155 pounds. Now, what we do know absolutely is the fact that older you get in these lower weight class, your shelf life is very minimal. It's very tough for these guys. Cut weight, drain down as your body's changing, as your body's getting older. It's just harder to, melt the weight off you. And what that starts to do is it starts to really hurt your durability. Starts to hurt, your explosiveness, your cardio. All of these things start to really go down, especially now we're talking a 40-year-old in the 155 weight class, plus the fact that a decline is definitely coming because we do know that, we're talking about a 40-year-old guy here where, is he going to get better? No, this is where he is at this particular point. And I do think that this is, you could see this could be the big one. We're like, wow, Diego's definitely fallen off the cliff at this point. We will find out. But I do think that is coming within this fight, next fight. It can't be too far, I think, removed from this particular point. And stylistically, I do think that Hernandez is going to cause a lot of problems here for Diego overall. He's going to have, on the feet, faster hand speed, better combinations. I think he's the more athletic fighter between these two. The faster hands to me is going to be something that I think early on you're going to see a big difference between these two, where he's able to land these shots, have the slicker combinations overall. And what I also do like is the fact that he's going to have the volume advantage. So he can mix in these takedowns. He can do certain things like that. He can start to land the big shots, pitter patter the shots from the outside, look for takedowns. And I do believe that the takedowns could be there for him here because you kind of go back and you look, Diego can be taken down over his last 6 UFC fights. He has been taken down 23 times, 23 times in the last 6 fights. And yes, he has faced guys who are definitely, bulldozers, going to look for takedowns, but the path is there. Over those 6 fights, he's 2-4. Out of those 4 losses, 19 takedowns happened in those 4 losses. So it is a path. It is a spot where you can grind it out on him. You can take him down. You can work him. You can control him. And also you add on top that he's got the youth. He's got, 8 years younger. He's going to have the youth. He's going to be more explosive. I think he has the cardio advantage. I think he can, or it could be very close, but I think he can start to wear it again, a 40-year-old in this particular spot here. So I think that if he gets any takedowns, does those kinds of things on top. Hernandez has been subbed 1 time in his professional career. I think he can do enough where he's not going to get submitted here. Bank rounds, and at this money line number here, I like Hernandez here. So give me the youth here. Give me Alex Hernandez at -113. Next one here we're going to talk about is going to be Kelvin Gastelum. He is -250 on the comeback. Here we have Dustin Stoltzfus. He is +205. Now, Dustin, I'm not very high on this guy overall, really. But he is well-rounded. He's decently well-rounded. He's got some good, striking. He's got some decent power overall. He's got, unorthodox kind of footwork, very awkward movement at times. And I think some of those things has worked for him, where he's been able to kind of mix these things up a little bit. And he's leaned on his wrestling. And I think the wrestling is something for him that he needs if he wants to find any type of success in this fight. I think he has to push for these takedowns, try to get some top control, try to slow down Kelvin Gastelum overall. And over his last 3 victories for Dustin, he secured 6 takedowns. So for me, it looks like a path where he has to at least implement a few takedowns to find some type of success here. And Kelvin is a guy who does have wrestling. He not always goes to it, but he does have the wrestling. I think he can wrestle offensively. He can wrestle defensively. I think he's going to have enough where if Dustin is looking to crash the pocket, look for these takedowns, I think he's going to be able to kind of, get out of it, create the space, work back at range overall. And one of the other things that yes, Kelvin can implement these takedowns, but he has done it even in some fights where he's needed to look for some takedowns and needed to look for some control time. And in his last victory against Daniel Rodriguez, he secured 4 takedowns. So I do think it is an opening for him here where he can start to work that. But the overall better fighter here is going to be Kelvin Gastelum. I think he's just absolutely better everywhere. Another spot here where he's going to have the better boxing, the faster hand speed, the more power. I think the volume is going to be there as well, too. And all these things, I think, really do kind of stick out when you're looking at this fight. But the one thing that sticks out could be Kelvin Gastelum's stomach. Who knows what kind of position, shape he's going to be in. That's something that I think, has always been kind of an issue where, we just don't know what we're going to be getting out of him. He should be okay making the weight, all these things. But again, is he taking it seriously? Is he motivated? That's the only real concern, I think, that anyone who's looking at this fight is just what version of Kelvin Gastelum we will see. But the 2 large advantages that I do think that he does have here is going to be the cardio, is going to be the durability here, where I think Kevin can push that higher pace. I think he can move forward each round. I think he can really just outland, against Stoltzfus, working some of the power, working at range, pushing that volume out, looking for takedowns if he needs to kind of get some control time a little bit here. And I think it works out very well for him where he can mix up all of these things. And we know that Dustin is very hittable. He's another guy that, I think in the pocket, he's willing to get to enter the pocket, but he's a guy who just is very hittable when he does that. And also you got to add in, obviously, Kelvin Gastelum's, strength of schedule is just, a miles and miles away from anything that Dustin Stoltzfus has faced. You got to sprinkle that in as well. But also where I'm going with this play is the fact that, yes, I like Kelvin Gastelum for all the reasons I just mentioned. But the one thing that I do think is that I do think this goes to the decision here. I do think that Kelvin Gastelum, is not going to get the finish here. I do think that Dustin is tough in certain spots. I do think that he can kind of make it grimy a little bit, have a close round where, he's leaning up against him, looking for some control time here. But Kelvin Gastelum has not really been a finisher. He's not been a guy that's been able to knock guys out. His last knockout victory was Michael Bisping in 2017. 2017. So not the greatest there where you're talking about, his ability to get finishes anymore. At one point he was. At this point, I don't really see it much happening. So this is where I'm going with it, where I'm going Kelvin Gastelum by points here. That's sitting around plus 155. I like that spot. I love that plus money there, as you guys do know. So I think this is a spot here where Kelvin Gastelum can outwork him over the 3 rounds, positionally win, look for some takedowns and find the victory on the scorecards. So I'm going Kelvin Gastelum by points plus 155. And the last one here we're going to talk about is going to be Claudio Puelles minus 110. This is a pick 'em. And we got Joaquim Silva at minus 110. Now, in November of 2022, I did attend a UFC 281. It was an awesome event, definitely a great event overall. Izzy versus Ferreira, saw Ferreira get the job done. But the one thing that stuck out was how shitty the performance was from Claudio Puelles, where he fought Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker, we did bet Dan Hooker in that spot, but it looked like Claudio was, trying to mimic Royce Gracie. I mean, it was just a terrible performance from him. He was basically like scooting around on his butt. He was begging for Dan Hooker to jump into his guard, which is just absolutely crazy. He kept knocking Puelles down, and then Puelles was almost just flopping to the ground just to hope that Dan would think, hey, he's hurt, I'm going to jump on him, so Puelles could start to utilize his grappling. It was kind of a crazy scenario here. I thought it was a very ugly scenario for him, but that was 3 years ago. And you got to give him a little bit of credit because now he's 29 years old and he's training at Kill Cliff. And I think that is going to help him here. And we have seen, even in his most recent fight last year in February, where he did have some takedowns. And he has had some takedowns in the past, but it looked cleaner. It looked like he was able to do it a little bit better. Dan Hooker's obviously a tough fighter overall, but I liked what I saw in this fight against Farasiam, where he was able to secure 7 takedowns. Now, he lost a split decision, very close fight. But it was the ability that he was able to display wrestling, to display looking for takedowns. That is something that I think him entering into this fight now is starting to add some of these tools in a spot where maybe he can really exploit, Silva in this spot here. And again, he's 29 years old. He's a guy that, I think is another spot going to make improvements as he moves on, where Silva does have the power here. There's no doubt that, there's going to be some moments where he's going to be throwing these massive shots here. And that's where I do think that there may be opportunity here for Puelles, because the fact that Silva does throw everything 100% power, because he does overthrow. He is a guy that, if he lands, guy hits like a truck. But if he doesn't land, he's going to start to slow down. He's going to be out of position. I think some of these big throws that he does have is going to have openings for takedowns, for counters, for Puelles. And I think we all know that that's where he wants this fight mostly. And I think he's going to sell out for him. I think he's going to try to mix in some strikes and then really have some well-timed takedowns behind those opportunities here. Silva is 2-5 out of his last 7 fights. His most recent victory was against Clay Guida, which Clay Guida was like half in retirement, aged out veteran here, which we all love Clay, respect to him, but he was pretty much done with the UFC at that point. And, it was a close fight, which is kind of shocking here, where you had a close striking fight with Clay Guida, and, Guida was able to, what was it? It was 46-43 favoring Silva. And I just thought it was just an ugly fight overall. Where here you do see now he's been taken out 6 times over his last 3 fights, and I do think that again opens up opportunities here for Puelles. Get some takedowns, get some control time here, and we are seeing also what I do like about Puelles is the cardio. That was something where it looked a little bit iffy, and his fight against Varas shot 13 takedowns. Did show that he does have some cardio, that he can kind of push that pace a little bit here. So I do think there's opportunities for him here. So in this spot here, I am going Claudio Puelles. I don't think, we're sitting at a pick 'em price tag here. I think that this guy, you've got Silva aging out. Puelles probably made, more improvements. I think the takedowns will be there. So I'm going Claudio Puelles to get the job done. So there you have it for my plays for Noche UFC. If you want to become a client, link down in the description. Again, next week, hopefully I will be announcing my new sponsorship here on the pod. And let's get it done this Saturday, and let's cash.